The environmental problem is inherited from mass production. Mass production is the source of our environmental problem. So the way to solve the environmental problem is to divorce ICT from mass production. That marriage is a wrong marriage. That marriage happened for two reasons which were not in the cards. One was that oil, after becoming very expensive and creating all sorts of possibilities for alternative technologies, conservation, this and that and the other, and many businesses went down in price to so low that it was less than it was before the energy crisis. So all those companies went bankrupt, but the main thing is that materials and oil became so cheap that the information revolution became consumerist. You know, it went the same old way. And because the Chinese and all that, because of low-cost labor to do that, and because the Chinese wanted to have all those same products that in their dreams are the American way of life, which continues to be, unfortunately, the dream of most of the world, ICT has not been capable of developing its own ICT plus green, which makes much more sense. Because at first, you know, people said, oh, we're not going to use any more paper, and people are going to work from home. But those were the logical consequences of the paradigm. But not if it was married to the old one, because don't forget that the reason why a paradigm develops is because it makes some things cheap, very cheap. It's because information is cheap, and processing information is cheap, and transmitting information is cheap, that the paradigm can develop. And it was because oil was cheap, electricity was cheap, energy-intensive materials were cheap, plastics were cheap, that the mass production paradigm developed the way it did. So if you have this new set of cheap things, plus the old cheap things also cheap, you don't abandon the old. They've got to get expensive. And it's happening because of Chinese demand, that materials are becoming expensive, and that oil is becoming expensive, and that freight traffic is going to become more and more expensive, that we will have a more rational way of using the potential of this paradigm and divorcing the old, which was a consumerist mode, which created both danger of resource depletion and global warming. The first half is 20, 30 years. The second half is 20, 30 years. And in between, there can be any amount of years. So, you know, it can last a lot. If you take the mass production one, it went from 1908 to 1974, when the oil price changes. That's a lot of years. And we now have been, since 71, they overlap sometimes, you know. So since 71 until now, I mean, we're still in the turning point. 71 to 2000 was 30 years. Then turning point, who knows, we're about 8, and we still have probably 20 or 30 ahead. And if we think of the possibilities of globalization as a positive sum game for the whole planet, that would really mean that this would be a very long one, not a shorter one as everybody expects because of the quickness of innovation, and that the gestation period of all these other things, biotech, nanotech, etc., would have many successes. As you know, IBM was a success during the mass production period, and so were many things. We had numerical control machine tools, we had control instruments, the whole of the control industry, which was analog at first and then digital, for the chemical industry, for all these things, that was all forerunners. Radar, all these things were forerunners of what later would be the information revolution. So we will have many, many biotech, nanotech things happening, but not yet the revolution, that how they will combine, who knows. But we have so much innovation in ICT to go yet. We have so much innovation in environment to go yet. So much in transportation. We are so far behind in innovating in transportation precisely because of the low cost of oil.